Thank you all for coming. I know honeybee medicine is usually one of the hot topics at conferences still because a lot of us as veterinarians are expected to go into these hives with beekeepers and be experts in honeybee medicine when we've maybe not even been a beekeeper ourselves. So how many of you have been in hives or have been a beekeeper prior to coming to this talk? Okay, 2, 3, okay. So that's pretty common. So I'm going to go through with you guys in kind of a step-by-step fashion. Hopefully, for those of you that have been in hives, you might learn a little bit about how I approach this with the client aspect, but we'll go through each step and how I go into the hives when I'm working on an apiary. So my background in beekeeping actually started in 2016. My sister and I started beekeeping together. I was a first-generation beekeeper. I had never done this before. But uniquely, in 2016 was right around when the veterinary feed directive was released. And so as a veterinarian doing beekeeping, I became instantly famous and started making these connections with beekeepers that I had never had before because I was one of very few veterinarians that were interested in beekeeping at that time. So that opened up quite a few opportunities for me, really from 2017 until currently, where I've had great connections with my university, the entomology department, and their pollinator program, and have been able to help on the teaching background, both locally and regionally. And then we also have a really great clerkship for the veterinary students now. We've had that for the past couple of years, where they do 3 weeks of intense honeybee medicine, mostly with our entomology department, but I'll come out and do hive inspections with them then as well. And then with my USDA background and my honeybee background, I had a very cool interaction and the opportunity to become the bumblebee inspector in Michigan for a company called Copert. They do a lot of different biologics, but they also do bumblebees. And so for the past 2 years, I go out there here just to make sure everything is looking great as far as disease goes. I review a lot of their PCR testing, so some of it's kind of boring, but then I get to go into all of these what look like cooler chambers. I can't take any pictures for you guys behind the scenes, but I get to go in and inspect those before they get shipped out. And that's really great because for my students, I'm able to bring my vet tech students and my veterinary students with me just to kind of show them a different aspect of veterinary medicine versus what we typically think. So all of you, as far as kind of what are we looking at today? Why do bees need vets? And most of the time, people are reaching out to me because they think they need a veterinary feed directive. 90% of them don't need a veterinary feed directive. And so we're going to go through some of the common diseases that I see and when we would potentially need to write one and talk about antibiotics. Biosecurity is big even for honeybees, and probably more so because it's easy for us to transfer diseases between hives and then between apiaries, depending on what we're working with. I always go through how I talk with the beekeeper. We do a history taking just like you would a cat or dog. We'll go through the apiary assessment, which is kind of the husbandry aspect of it, like where do they put their hive, what things to think about. The 6 points of a hive inspection, I try to keep it as simple as possible. I do this the same every time, and then go through treatment plans if we need them. I always get this question about whether honeybees are domesticated, and I personally think they're semi-domesticated. The verdict isn't out as far as whether that's black or white, but they are pollinators of crops that we have brought in. Western honeybees were brought over for us. However, we also feed them. So we feed them sugar water and pollen patties. So we are kind of manipulating their diet. We're manipulating their location because we're often taking them from places like Michigan to California for almonds. And then to a certain extent, we can actually manipulate the queen genetics. Although for the most part, we can't control the drones. We can control drone areas, like on different islands, but we can't 100% control those unless we're artificially inseminating queens, which most of our local beekeepers are not. However, it can be done. For the most part, our bees are free-ranging. I kind of think of them like free-ranging chickens. My free-ranging chickens usually fly as well, like to go wherever they want. But these guys come back to the hive if you're doing everything right. However, they will return to feral state within 1 generation. And so their lifespan is very short. Most of them are 6 weeks versus our winter bees are going to be about 6 months. So the speed of reproduction is very different than if we were talking about a cow or a goat or a sheep. Maybe you would get 2 if you're doing an accelerated program, but most of the time you're just going to get 1 reproduction cycle where queens can get 3 or 4 in 1 season. So the question on domestication actually goes a little bit further. Most of this is research-based, but I will tell you, and I don't know specifics for Washington State, but in Michigan, We do have some beehives, some beekeepers in the UP that are actually keeping their bees, not just for winter, but all around in indoor storage. And they're controlling the temperature, they're controlling the humidity, and then also the CO2 levels. Michigan State is doing this, but they're doing it more on a research level to see if we can improve our overwintering. Most of the honeybees are being lost in the winter. So they're trying to figure out what can we do to manipulate that to try to improve our survival. However, that's another layer of domestication for them. And this is actually the facility at Michigan State, kind of similar to what you would see at the bumblebee facility as well. So they're inside these little chambers. And then the next question, which I do believe, and it has been classified now, are honeybees livestock? And we are now classifying them as livestock. They are classified by the federal government. And the main reason is they produce products from apiculture that are entering the food chain. The biggest one, honey. Propolis also, which is kind of, I think of that, it's almost like Tootsie Roll taffy if you've ever seen it, but people do eat it as well. Pollen is a big one, and then royal jelly. So they are considered livestock. So we need to start thinking of them as livestock. And that's a unique way to do that. But if you look at all these hives, we're really just looking at a herd of cows. This is actually Craig McConnell's cow, in case you guys know him. It's one of his girls. But it's pretty easy to think like that because when you come to these big apiaries, this is a relatively small one, but they are quite large. And in some cases, we have beekeepers that have 2,000 hives. So you can imagine equating that to beef cattle. It's a pretty big operation. And where we come in is honeybees as food security. So you probably know pollinators are very important, right? As us, as veterinarians in the veterinary medicine world, we know that the pollinators are important to our food chain. They actually populate 1/3 of our food supply, and they produce over 15 billion worth of crops annually. So this is a big production, and this is why we are getting more attention to the pollinators, not just honeybees, because there is some money behind it. And then the other reason is people are starting to pay attention to the actual third part of the triad of One Health. When we normally think of One Health, we think of human health and animal health, but people often forget about the environmental health. And what do honeybees do? Well, they're really kind of the yellow canary for the environmental health. And if any of you have kind of recently started looking at the news, the survival of honeybees, not just honeybees, but other pollinators is a huge deal. And we're losing significant numbers every year. And we're trying to figure out why. And I think most of us already, as veterinarians, know the answer is why, but how do we fix them? So we have a lot of genetically modified crops. We have a lot of monoculture diets. We have decreased bee survival from that. We have a lot of pesticide applications, and we do know now there's a program out where beekeepers can register and they can be alerted when pesticides are being applied, and they actually literally have to do things like cover the hives with special material so that the bees are not flying during that time. So all of those things are increasing bee mortality. And then we have this really fun pathogen that everybody talks about and we'll go over today, and that's varroa mite. So that is the little mite there. I don't know if this is going to work, but oh, it just wants to go backwards. But it's the little mite on the left side. So varroa mite we'll go through extensively, but that's a big reason why we're losing a lot of our honeybees. I put this slide in here just to kind of show you an example of what's in the news and how we pay attention. So when we looked at African swine fever, there was about a 40% mortality in African swine fever as well, and it was a huge deal. Huge number of pigs were dying and or being culled because of the disease. But we see this every year in honeybees. There we go. We see it every year in honeybees, but nobody's really talking about it. So this was a program that took a break this year. It's called the Bee Informed program. And what they do is it's kind of like a citizen science program where you can register your hives and you do some sampling every month for 6 months. And then at the end of that, there is a questionnaire for everybody, both on the backyard, the sideliner, which is about 100 to 200 hives, and then the commercial level. So you can see the breakdown on the bottom there. But the overall mortality or loss in the red or pink is the annual loss, and it reaches about 40 to 50% in the past couple of years, and some even above 50%. So if you can imagine having 1,000 cows and losing 500 of them every year, that would be a super big deal for us as veterinarians. And that's really what's happening in the honeybees every year. And it's kind of one of those things where I think the quote from Temple Grandin is that don't let bad become normal. And I think that's what we've done, is that we've just kind of normalized this loss, because what do commercial beekeepers do? If any of you have any experience in beekeeping, they bring those 500 hives back to their home base and then they split them. And then they have 1,000 hives again. And yes, it slows down their production during that time, but they've already factored that into their program. And so now they've just doubled their hives again. And so if it's not broke, I guess don't fix it. But why are 50% of our bees dying when we're asking them to go pollinate almonds, which is really the biggest thing? And something that we as beekeepers, as veterinarians need to be a part of, because we are already a part of this discussion of what are we doing to these pollinators, not just honeybees, that are causing all of these
Yes,
issues.
nobody wants to be outside. It's the best way to do it. I can't order that, but my husband.
I don't know how to control that, so we'll just keep talking. So how to be a honeybee expert. I'm going to try to teach you in the next 40 minutes. But I think in general, if anybody has been doing this long enough, veterinarians are always expected to be the expert on every species. And I think we do a pretty good job for what we're asked to do on a daily basis. But you don't have to own your own bees. You don't have to know bees inside and out, and you don't have to know every disease for bees. So the next 40 minutes, I'm just going to try to actually go through with you the basics, but also show you where the resources are. And these resources are brand new resources that a lot of people in the background from universities, Michigan State included, have been working on for several years, because they saw this problem coming and we were not ready. We were not ahead of the game when veterinarians were asked to be part of the picture. Kind of like aquatics medicine, when we were asked to be part of the fishery and wildlife, we were not ahead of that as well, and we're now just catching up. But you do need to know a few things. You need to know beekeeping terminology, and there's a lot of it. The one I see most commonly misused is hive versus colony, and I probably will do that today as well. The hive is the box that they live in. The colony is the animal itself, so the colony of bees. So try to use that terminology when you're talking about it. Parts of the hive, this is huge. There's so much terminology to look at. What is a medium versus a deep box? What's a frame? What's drawn out foundation? The main thing is the Langstroth hive, which is really the square kind of rectangle box. I'll show you a picture of that. But kind of going to some of these classes or finding a mentor to get used to the terminology is helpful. Betterbee.com has a whole entire website available to look at that. And then when you actually go into the hive, we need to be aware of how we're feeding them. If this was a cat or dog, we look at the nutrition basis. So what are we feeding them? The biggest thing is pollen, nectar, and then nectar becomes honey. And the players in the hive are important. So you need to know that there's usually only one queen, unless there's an issue. The drones, the males are usually there during certain times of the season. They get kicked out in the winter. And then the worker bees are always the females. And we'll go through some of the things that they do in the hive. But if you haven't seen them before, I think just very, very basics, but things to know. The queens look like this. So they have the longer abdomen. The drones are a little bit larger with larger eyes, and then the workers are the smaller ones. So, and the hive's gonna be made of mostly worker bees. And then when you look at the components, this is the most common hive you're gonna see, and just kind of getting used to the terminology, because the beekeepers are gonna be talking to you like this, and you're gonna be like, what's a deep? And that they're just gonna use the word deep. So when they're using that terminology, kind of knowing what they're talking about, but this helps if you're working with a beekeeper. I just love this slide because it's very interesting what worker bees do in the hive, and it changes depending on what they were fed and depending on the day of their life cycle. So they kind of start off as nurse bees taking care of the young, and then they work their way up to foragers, and often they basically die as foragers flying to get food for the hive. And that lifespan, again, is only about 6 weeks or 42 days. This just shows you just a different aspect of how these bees are, the life cycle of them in the summer. Again, 6 weeks, but you can kind of see as they emerge what they go through, and then become foragers at the end of the day. And then 5% of the hive is drones. I don't know if I had mentioned that, so 95% are worker bees. When I go out to an apiary or I'm working with a beekeeper, I usually try to set up expectations that it is very hard to treat honeybees over the phone. You're always going to have that beekeeper. Like I have quite a few people in my local and regional clubs that I've worked with for several years. So if they tell me they have something in their hive, they're usually going to send me a picture or a video, but I have a relationship with that person, and it's not a person that has 2,000 hives. Most of the people I work with are hobbyists. But when I get onto the apiary, I give them the option of working their own hive or letting me work their hive with them beside me. A lot of people are maybe have had bees for like 2 or 3 years and they're still not comfortable with working in the hive, so they usually want me to work the hive. So just keep that in mind. If you are starting to do honeybee medicine, you may want to work a hive with somebody to get comfortable doing that. Biosecurity protocol I'll go through in detail, the hive inspection points, and then treatment options. I prefer follow-up. I think my clients are usually pretty good. They will do either a virtual follow-up in 2 weeks and or if this was close to the fall, I'm also very interested in if that hive made it through the winter. I don't think I could recreate this picture if I tried, but if you guys know, praying mantises will eat honeybees. So this praying mantis clearly knew that I was looking at a diseased hive, which you haven't learned anything yet. That's a very spotty brood pattern. And so one of my friends was with me and she was like, hold on a second. First and foremost, I learned this the hard way. I thought I'm just gonna go help this novice beekeeper and I'll just wear a veil and it'll all be fine. And I got quite a few stings. They like to sting here, the hot parts of you. So just know, even if you're wearing jeans, they will sting through all of that. So make sure you have sting prevention or PPE. This picture on your guys' right is kind of probably what I would recommend if you haven't done a lot of hive work. It's the full outfit. I still use it to this day because I'm working with a lot of students that like to piss off the bees before I do something with them, and or I'm working with a younger beekeeper and they may have already pissed the hive off. And so I'll use full equipment. When I'm working on my own hives, I will use a jacket like the one on the left, and or I'll use a veil. But some things to note, even this guy, this is one of we have a Heroes to Hives program in Michigan. And so this is one of our veterans. You can see his shoe attire is probably not the best. He has flip-flops on. So if he has a pissed off hive, he's gonna get stung. And from his career, he really didn't have a lot of feeling in his hands. So he didn't really care if he got stung on his hands, but I do care if I get stung on my hands. So when we're talking about hand protection and gloves, that leads us into biosecurity for the bees. We know this all from livestock. Most diseases walk onto your farm in 2 legs or 4 legs, so from us or from the animals. And in this case, it's 6 legs from the honeybees. But where the disease transmission happens most commonly is us, the veterinarian or the beekeeper. So you want to protect yourself, protect your hands, and then I double glove. So everybody's familiar with the purple or the blue vinyl gloves. So I usually double those. I will tell you they can still sting through those, but if you're working the hive, and it's a normal day, you're not going to have an incidence of getting stung. The leather gloves will carry disease though. They're very hard to clean. They're very hard to sterilize. So when we work our sentinel hives or we're doing teaching hives, these are some of the students from the veterinary clerkship. We're all going to be wearing gloves. And then equipment is important as well, because you're going to see a lot of beekeepers having lots of different tools. And I'm totally fine using their tools on their hives. But one thing I always educate is everybody that's a beginner beekeeper loves this bee brush, which is the yellow brush up there. And that kind of brushes the bees away from stuff if you need to look at something. And it tends to not really piss them off. But it carries disease because those bristles are really hard to clean. So one of the alternatives that I like, that Megan Milbrath, when I was working with her, I like to pick up a lot of tools from her. She will just grab long blades of grass and just use the grass blades to move the bees around. People also use feathers, which you could obviously dispose of those between hives, but you want to just be aware of that. I really like this hive tool in the lower right corner. It's what I use, but you can see it has a wood handle. So I really wouldn't want to use it between hives or between apiaries. So when I go out to other people's hives, I use the red handle one, very cheap. You can pick them up on Amazon. And that's nice because I have my own hives, so I can remember which tools stay with my veterinary truck and which tools stay with my hives. And just kind of important to talk to people, especially European foul brood. It's easy to transfer that between hives and give it to multiple colonies. And then if they have different apiaries, moving it between different apiaries, because a lot of people don't have different tools for each apiary. They're going to have their tools that they drive to each location. And so that's a perfect opportunity as a veterinarian to talk about disease transmission. And when I do sanitize them, I usually just use warm water if I have it. Comment type scrub, and then just scrub away the propolis and the honey from it and sterilize it that way. You can spray a bleach solution on it or an alcohol solution if you're on the truck, but most of the time just scrubbing with something that has a little bit of abrasive material will help get that clean. Beekeeper history taking, I want to talk to the client because I want to get a perspective of how many years of experience do they have and where the hives are, what location they're at, where do they get their bees is sometimes important. It's just important to ask too if you don't have a lot of experience with honeybees, because if you are maybe taking this information to one of your Washington extension people, they may want to know, what was the source of the queen, what was the source of the bees, what type of hive do they have, and I'll show you a reason why that's important. And then in general, you kind of want to approach the subject of how much survival do they have in the winter. Is this a beekeeper that usually has the average 40% loss, or are they losing 100% of their bees every year, and trying to figure out why that might be happening for them. This is an older version, but just something to kind of think of. Having something like this, so my students have something to fill out when we're at the hive location. I found that I just didn't have enough room on this one sheet, but consider making something like this for you. And then I take a picture of it for my own records, and I give this to the client. So they have something when I walk away that talks about the plan. Apiary location does become important for certain types of disease. I always talk to people about neighborhoods because I'll show you in the next picture, a lot of these hives are like right in their backyard between two houses that are very close to them. So you have to talk about that with these beekeepers, even if they've only been at it for a year or two, because you'll have swarms. I've had people have swarms on top of neighbors' cars. They don't usually appreciate that. So kind of having that conversation ahead of time is important. Near pest or crops or pesticides is important. Road traffic, because if it's right on the edge of a road, if you're doing something on the edge of like a orchard, that might piss the bees off as well. There's a lot of road traffic and noise, and they may be a little bit angrier hive when you're going into it. Where the actual hive location is important too. Shade versus full sun. You want at least partial sun, if not full sun. If they're in the shade, you tend to have more issues with ants or other insects that enjoy the shade. And then ideally facing southeast. And the reason for that is they're going to get most of the sun throughout the day. So those bees are going to get up earlier, they're going to do more, they're going to be happier, the hives are going to be warmer. And so that is the ideal location, but it's not a black and white, just trying to avoid some of the common things like crowding them and wind protection are big. So these two hives in theory are crowded, but that is how most of the hives are going to be. If you're going to put a number on it, it's very similar to livestock. If we're quarantining, we want about 10 feet between them. And so ideally you would want standalone hives, and I'll show you a couple pictures of what that looks like. So the ones in the lower right-hand corner are still a little close together, but you can see they're made as kind of solo towers. The ones on the left, you can tell that these ones were definitely domesticated. But this is probably my average beekeeper that I go visit, if I'm being perfectly honest. It's usually the people that have 3 to 10 hives and just have disease or they don't know what they're looking at and they're worried. So this is right in the backyard. Making sure that the entrance to the hive is somewhere where it's not going right into the neighbor's yard is important. So where the front of the hive is, so you guys can see that from this picture here. That is important because that's where the majority of the traffic is going to be in that lane. And you want that facing somewhere that is not going to piss off your neighbors. And then the other one is full shade almost in the entire day. And they actually did have an ant problem. And so that's just an example. This hive is really cute. It was adorable, but the bees absconded and left because they did not like this hotel that they were living in. And the big thing about this is when I broke it open, there's just bees trying to rob it. That's why there's some bees like flying around. But all of this comb is drawn out comb that was built by the honeybees. So you cannot remove it to inspect the hive. The nice thing about wood foundation or wood frames and plastic frames, depending on picking your poison, you can pull them out and you can inspect the hive. This one, I could look maybe at the bottom and see if there's any swarm cells, but like that's it. So it makes it very hard to do that. Versus the flip side, which is a true observational hive. This is something that the bees can usually only be in for about 24 to 48 hours. But this is really cool when I'm teaching. I will bring this. The bottom of the hive that you can't see has a couple frames in it. And then I just pulled one frame up so the students or 4-H kids can see that, but they can't live in that. That's a situation where I can close it all up and bring it into a classroom, but I can't keep them in there for more than a couple days. All right, so down to the hive evaluation. I like acronyms for my vet students, so I'm trying to give them ways to memorize this, but we're looking at these 6 components. We're going to go through each of them individually. But if you remember, fact is quality bees means free of disease bees. You can remember the 6 stages. I said again, the Be Informed website took a break. They're not enrolling in the citizen science program right now, but the website is still up and fully functional. And the reason I say that is because it has really good pictures and goes through each of like the inspection type points and has really great pictures in it as well. So most of those pictures are from this guideline and you can go back to it at any time. When we're talking about the colony, so that's the animal, so to speak, itself, we want to talk about them in frames of bees. That's giving us as the veterinarian a perspective of how big is this hive? Is it already in trouble? Or does it sound like it's a pretty robust hive for the time of year and we got to go in and figure out what else is going on? So frames of bees are going to be basically each of the frames, how many of them are covered entirely with bees. And so you can see B is a good example because they're only really calling this about 1.5 frames of bees because it's just that nucleus in the center. So you kind of got to figure out how many full frames would that cover. And that's important when you're talking veterinarian to veterinarian or when you're talking to an extension person, so you can explain what's going on in that hive. And just some good examples. The one on the left is a pretty happy hive based on spring season. The one on the right is maybe struggling a little bit. And then when you pull the frames out, it's really hard to know how is that hive doing because this frame looks very full of bees. And I don't know if you guys, can you guys see the queen in that one? I don't know why my pointer's not working, but. So that frames are hard because people want to just show me frames. And I have no idea what's going on with the rest of the herd, so to speak, right? Like what else is going on? That one frame, the rest of the hive could be pretty empty. But if that one frame goes back in the box on the left, then great, they're probably doing a pretty good job. The second point of inspection is queen status. You don't always have to see the pretty queen like that, but you need to figure out and be comfortable as a veterinarian deciding if we are queen right, or if the queen's not seen, or potentially we're queenless. And so some things that I look for in the hive, obviously if we see the queen, it's really great. And I also try to photo document her if it's my own hives or my teaching hives so that we can remember what she looks like because they all look a little bit different sometimes. If we're saying queen right, that means that we haven't seen the queen, but when we go into the hive, the stages of the larva look very happy and we're seeing a single egg in each of the cells. So we know that she's laying eggs and eggs are 1 to 3 days. So you can't say somebody could have killed her 2 days ago and we don't know that yet as the beekeeper, but most of the time, if you see eggs in that hive, you're likely queen right and things are going okay. So you're looking for those eggs. Let me see if this will work. Oh, hold on. Okay, can you guys see that pointer there? So I'm hoping you guys can see this with the light, but those are the eggs. And this is really important and very hard to train, but they look like tiny little rice noodles. And if you look really, really close, you can see 2 here. And I'm just going to tell you, because this was my hive, I had one of Megan Milbrath's queens. And Megan Milbrath, if any of you know her, she's like the Mary, she's the guru of honeybees in the country, really. One of, and we happen to have her in Michigan, which I'm very lucky. And so that was a connection I made very early on in 2017 when I was beekeeping. And her queens are crazy and they're like very, very robust. And so her new queens, the first couple of weeks, are laying so many eggs that they don't have any space for them. And so sometimes they'll lay 2 eggs to a cell. And I knew that because that was very early on. I was still a baby beekeeper. I still consider myself a baby beekeeper. I called Megan up and I was like, what is going on? Like there's 2, do I have a laying worker already? Like what's happening? Is something wrong with my queen? And she's like, no, they often do that the first couple of weeks when they're brand new queens and they're still trying to figure out what's going on. I'll show you some other examples when hives are not queen right, but these are just pictures of the queens. So obviously if you see the queen, great. If you're a brand new beekeeper, oftentimes they'll have a marked queen, which is really nice. So that's the little green spot here that you can see on the upper left. So you can see that little green dot. That typically equates to the year. So the color equates to the year that the queen was emerged. This is an example of a hive that may not be queen right. So if you look really closely into these cells, you can start to see 2 tiny little rice noodles. So you can see these 2 little ones here. There's 2 there. And the other thing you might start to notice is they're not perfectly in the center anymore. The queen's usually pretty near perfect. And so she'll usually put them pretty close to the center, just a little off center. But when they start to stick to the edge of the cells and they're kind of all haphazardly in there, then you know there may be an issue and we might have something else going on. if you look hard long enough, or you kind of happen to catch the queen when she doesn't really care that it's like you've opened the hive and destroyed her whole home for a second to see what's going on with her, which often I think like we're just kind of taking the top off of somebody's house to look at them when we're doing inspections, so we want to be quick about it, but you can actually sometimes catch the queen. She's actually dipping her back end in to lay an egg, and oftentimes if it's a happy hive, you'll kind of see all of the worker bees around her just kind of supporting her in case she needs anything. And that's really cool when you can get a nice, like what looks like a flower picture, but that's a pretty happy hive versus if they are trying to hurt her, then something else is going on. My favorite part of the inspection is brood pattern. I don't know why, but the brood patterns just make me really happy. So these are all the baby bees that have gotten to the stage where they're capped. And once they uncap, they'll emerge as a brand new baby fuzzy bee. So you can start to scale this. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to have your own scale in your mind. I kind of think of it like body condition scoring. So the bottom one is almost near perfect. So that would be a 5 versus the 3 is still, that's a spotty brood in the middle, but 1 is like what something's going on. Like most of the bees have emerged and or been pulled out. And so this also helps you to determine not only how vigorous is the colony, are they doing a really good job? If you come in and a lot of the frames look like this, then you're probably good. Now, this is not a spotty frame, and I'll tell you why. So when we think of spotty frames, we're going to go through a lot of examples of that. But when we look at this, we're looking at all of these little ones in here are purposely put in there, and you can't probably see the reflection, but there's nectar in there. So that's basically honey being put in. And the reason for that is the workers are very smart and they like to put little pit stops along the way so they can pick up nutrition if they need it. The other thing that you will notice if you work hives long enough is there's a syndrome called honey bound. And so if the bees don't have enough room in their house anymore, they're going to start putting honey everywhere. And oftentimes they'll start putting it in where the brood should go, which is the baby bees, because they don't have any other room. That starts to lead to swarming, because when you run out of room in your house, what do? You sell your house, you buy a new one. So the bees will say, we no longer can fit in here. And they'll, in their case, they'll swarm and they'll kick half of the hive out after they build a new queen, and they'll take the old queen with them. And you don't really want that because that reduces your production. That if you're doing this for honey, it really reduces your honey production, because as you can imagine now, you just cut your workforce by 50%. So you're not going to be able to bring in the honey that you need for that season. It's not the worst case scenario, but you really want to prevent swarming. Now, these are not full frames, but these would still be considered 5s because, and I'll show you in this bigger one, this is from Megan Milbrecht's website. You can see here, and we'll go through the food in the next slides, but this is all happy bees that are capped in the center here. And then all of their food sources, which sometimes there's pollen out here. You can see a little bit of pollen in there. And then you've got the nectar and the capped honey off to the edge. So that's the wax with the capped honey. So this is a perfect situation. Most of the time when I talk to people about hives, you almost kind of want to think of it like an egg. And so when you cut that egg open, the yellow or the center is going to be the brood. And then you're going to have these layers of food around the edges. But they're usually kept in boxes, so you have to kind of think about that. So the fourth thing that we look at for, this is an example of spotty brood, or examples of spotty brood. This one up at the top I left in here because depending on what's going on with this hive, you really have to look at this to know, is this okay? Is this just hygienic behavior and the bees are doing what they're supposed to, and maybe they're putting a little bit of nectar in those, and or it's fall. If it's fall time, they're going to start ramping down. They don't need as many bees anymore because the honey production has kind of passed, and we're starting to get ready for winter, and we're starting to get ready for overwintering. Versus these other two, these are definitely hives that are in trouble, and you can see a lot of reasons for that, but we'll go through diseases in the next hour. Varroa mite, number 4 inspection is probably the most important. I think that you really, when you're getting these hives, you have to teach these beekeepers that varroa mite is important. So I think of this as parasites when we're talking about sheep and goats, ticks and fleas when we're talking about dogs and cats. These parasites are important, or intestinal parasites in dogs and cats too, and we have to be able to take care of them. We've domesticated this hive, or this colony. We brought this hive onto our property. We need to take care of it just like a cat, dog, or a horse. And one of the things that we need to handle is varroa mite. So most of my beekeepers are not even comfortable taking a mite count, but these are what the mites look like. I took a very cool MSU microscope course. And so we were able to get some images. This is the top side. This is the bottom side of what the varroa mite looks like. You can see them by the naked eye. I will show you some pictures of them kind of size-wise, what they look like. But the important thing about this slide is the research that's been done has actually looked at, and this was by Dr. Ramsey, this is where they want to hang out. And this is the bottom of the bee, right? So this is the belly or the underside of the bee. And 60% of them want to actually hang out in his research right there. So you're not going to usually be able to see these mites because they're tucked into their, almost like their belt buckle. They're tucked into their belly. And why that becomes important is because they're usually the silent killer. So most of the time you're not going to see these in a hive until you have a really, really, really bad problem. And I try to gently tell the beekeeper when we start to see mites on all the bees that there's an issue here. But I don't have to go very far into that discussion because I just say, okay, we're going to do a mite count now. And then the mite count is crazy high. And then we have a discussion about that. So high mite counts mean high risk of death to the colony. And that's because not only are the mites dirty hypodermic needles, because they're kind of injecting these viruses and bacteria into the bees, but the bees are also transferring those viruses and bacteria in between each other and the nurse bees to the larva. So the whole hive gets infected very quickly. Deformed wing virus is the big one that we talk about. There's a lot of viruses, but this is one you can see. So we talk about it. Bacterial diseases, they get predisposed to that. And so oftentimes it's like which came first, the cart or the horse. They can have really high mite counts and then get European foul brood because they're a stress diseased hive, but you don't know potentially which came first. And so the syndrome itself has been named parasitic mite brood syndrome or parasitic mite syndrome, or PMS, if you want to name it that. But the hive doesn't survive from this. And so we have to be aware of that and be on top of it. And I think I like this picture in here. And one of my friends, colleagues, Dr. Terry Kane, put this slide together because it just gives you a picture of like, this is how big they are if this was on us. Like nobody's going to ignore that. Like that would freak me out and give me nightmares. But so this is how big they are on the honeybees. Sorry, you guys, my like thing doesn't really want to. So you can see it right there on the back. And when you start to see them on the back like this, then you're in trouble. I won't quiz you on the science behind varroas, but there is a lot out there. I like this slide because it's beautiful and colorful, but it actually shows you at the start of the wheel there, when the baby bees are uncapped, so the larva stage, they're actually open and predisposed to these mites getting in there. And so that's what happens. These mites come off the bees and then they travel into the next larva they're going to infect. And while they're in there and the larva is developing, they exponentially develop alongside the larva. So when they go in as one, they kind of come out as like 6, 7 different versions. And so now you have this one bee that comes out with a couple of young adults on it or nymphs. And then the rest of those go into other cells with larvae and the whole cycle starts over again. So you've got one bee that developed and about 7 varroa mites maybe that developed. What do you think is going to happen to those numbers? Very quickly, the numbers get out of control. So what do we need to do? We need to teach our beekeepers, especially our newer ones, how to do a mite count. I honestly skip right over a sugar roll. That's going to be whether or not your queen has a name. And it's a hobby beekeeper, or if this is more of a, we're doing this for honey production, we understand that some of the bees have to be lost in the alcohol wash. Important to tell beekeepers that when you're doing an alcohol wash, you are sacrificing those 300 bees. They are not going to survive. You only make that mistake once when you're going out to the hives, but you are going to actually be sacrificing those bees. But I put it in perspective for people. So most of your hives are going to have, most colonies are going to have 30 to 50,000 bees. So 300 sacrificed to save the other 50,000 is okay. I like using these sippy cups. These are kids' sippy cups that you would put juice boxes in. This just makes your life a lot easier. And then you can actually measure out what a half a cup is. And you can put a half a cup of water in there is usually what we do. And then you'll put like a magic or a permanent marker line on them. And then I mark all my cups and that's what I have on the truck. So then I don't have to count out 300 bees, right? No one's doing that. The alcohol wash is just much more reliable because you don't have to sit there and sugar roll them and wait for the powdered sugar to piss the bees off and get them hot enough so that the mites fall off. The alcohol wash, boom, they're dead. You shake them, the mites fall off, you've got your number. So you do want to make sure you shake up the bees and deposit the alcohol. People will use washer fluid as well, like car washer fluid. You can reuse the alcohol as long as you take all the mites out of that liquid. You can reuse the alcohol for the next hive until you run out of that. But you're looking at the number of mites per 100 bees. So you're going to take whatever number you get from that cup and you're going to divide it by 3. And if you get anything, depending on the seasonality, between 1% and 3% or above, you're going to treat that hive. And so I feel like this is kind of the equation of when we're looking at strongyls in sheep and goats and trying to figure out what is our threshold, right? There's no exact number for that either. We have to look at what time of year is it, what's the body condition of that animal, is that animal already had kids, or is it in late stage pregnancy, where are they at in the disease pressure. You can also get these really fun little cups. A lot of companies sell different versions. And so this makes it a little bit easier for the beekeeper. And I'll sometimes have these on the truck just so I can leave them with something for the day to be like, now you're going to do it. I showed you how to do it, and now you're going to do it. So you don't have to memorize anything about what to do with varroa mites. You just need to find this website. It's called Honeybee Health Coalition. It's a very nice website. It's always updated with all of our bee specialists. And when you go to this website, you're going to be able to click on this decision tool. You start the decision tool. It's going to go through a bunch of stuff. It's going to tell you whether your mite count is too high or not. It's a very easy thing that you can do on your phone. But then it's going to even go as far as telling you what treatment options are available for if there's honey on the hive, what are you doing with the honey, what season is it, what's the temperature out. And so it really helps you through decision making, and you don't have to memorize all of that. But now I'm going to show you some sad bee pictures. This is actually from one of our working hives. The students were out with me, and we were taking these pictures because this hive had about 18 to 20 varroa mites to 300 bees, and so their hive count was very, very high. And you can see this is what happens. This was a brand new emerged bee that's still kind of fuzzy and light colored, and there's already a varroa mite on the back end. And this bee is not ever going to be a forager, let alone anything else. It's likely just going to die in hive. I like to play this game where I almost feel like it's like Where is Waldo? So if you guys can see, there are mites on those. And then if you're not looking for it, you may not see it, but then there's deformed wing virus right next to it, which is one of the major viruses that they give the bees, and something we can watch for. Just again, more examples of bees that are struggle bussing. And then more mites. So when you see this, oftentimes I just kind of train my eye when I'm going through. If I do see it, then I'm just a little bit more high alert on what's going on and making sure that we have a discussion and we do a mite count and we talk about it. Food stores. What are we feeding the bees is important. If you are in Michigan, it is very nice because we typically never have a problem with pollen, and we typically don't need to substitute it. The only time we might need to substitute it would be if we have baby hives, like packages of bees that are coming in where we're just starting out. But the pollen is the protein source. The carbohydrate source is the nectar or the honey. The terminology is different just depending on if it's been capped. So important to probably know if you are a veterinarian that's going to be doing honeybees. This is nectar, so it almost looks like, basically like liquid honey. And then once the bees dehydrate it down and they find it to be perfect, they will cap it with wax, and then it becomes the honey that we know of. You can also substitute carbohydrates. The most common way is sugar syrup, and this is something that is commonly done. Even in some of our, even in routine beekeeping, we'll usually be supplementing some spring sugar solution depending on what's going on with the bees. This is what a pollen patty looks like. The bees will take it down and eat it. It looks like it kind of comes like on a candy board. And then this is the most common way that we would feed sugar water. Ideally, the beekeeper needs to feed it inside the hive because otherwise it'll cause robbing, because as soon as other bees know that there's a sugar source there, they're going to come try to get it as well. And so there's much bigger ways to do this. This is just to put in perspective, that's going to last probably a day, if that. That's like a drink of water. If you have this is probably a smaller hive too, just kind of depends. It looks like there's only like maybe 7 or 8 frames, but this is just a smaller hive in that, look at the frames of bees. They're not loaded and loaded and loaded with bees. So this is a hive that's probably just starting. Most of the time we'll do the 1 gallon buckets or even the larger buckets. They're usually white plastic buckets that you can flip upside down, and then it with the pressure catches, and you can put hive boxes on top of that just to kind of enclose it. And that usually lasts maybe about a week in a good hive that's running really quickly. So you have to make sure if you are feeding them that you're staying up on that substitute. This is important though, because this is how commercial beekeepers do it. when they are moving these bees everywhere, they literally have the gallon drums of high fructose corn syrup because it's the cheapest. And I'm not throwing any of them under the bus, but this is just literally how they do it. And then they're going to feed them the high fructose corn syrup when they pull them off of the almonds and boost them up and give them some nutrition, plus or minus pollen patties, depending on where they're going, and artificially feed them as they go to the next place or they go back to their home base. In the winter, this becomes important, especially depending on where you're at, because that sugar solution is going to freeze, right? Depending on what it is. So they're going to do usually a sugar mountain and feed that way. This is what a happy frame looks like with happy food stores. So you're going to have all of the brood, which is the baby bees, and smartly so, they have all their food for the baby bees that are out here. So this is pollen. When it becomes fermented, they call it bee bread. And then on the edges here, you can see some capped and uncapped honey. Just some pretty food stores with horses in the background. And then looking at this at like kind of the, I don't want to say micro level, but like at the level of the larva, this is what you would be looking for if they're having a nutrition problem and they're struggling. And this is important as a veterinarian when you're going in, because this is one of the first signs that something's going on with the hive and they're struggling. So these larvae are in their little cells, but they're dry, versus this is a nice photo of like this one still has some nutrition. I guess this was a lucky one and this one got fed. But these ones are all dried up. So they're not in their nice little swimming pool of food. And so something's going on with this hive, and that's something that would alert you. On the flip side, though, if the adult bees are starving, you're going to go into the hive and you're going to look at something like this. So this is the adult starvation symptom. Most of the time, if you're doing winter autopsies, so to speak, and you're going into the hive, you're going to see this. They're usually still going to be clustered in what they were for the temperature. And then all the little, you're going to see a bunch of baby or adult bee butts. And then last but not least is disease inspection. So we're going to go through a couple of the most common diseases with you guys in the next hour, if you guys are staying around for that. If not, there will be notes. But this is a spotty brood pattern. So this is the first thing you're going to see as a veterinarian. Hey, there's something maybe going on in this hive. This doesn't look right. And then these are the top 5 diseases that we see as veterinarians. Honestly, I hesitate to even put American foul brood on there. I do realize this is a local, state to state difference, but in Michigan, I have been doing this since 2017, and I have not seen American foul brood in person yet. And I work with Megan Milbrath, Anna Heck, all of the big people, and they know to call me as soon as they see it, because I want to be able to see it in person. Most common disease I diagnose is parasitic mite syndrome. So it's more usually a husbandry issue and a mite issue. And then second most common is European foul brood. This is the resource. If you remember nothing else from this talk, take a picture of this or take it down, beesneedvets.com. Michigan State is hosting the website right now, so you have to go to their website to get it. But I want to highlight all of these individuals and money sources, really, where the research came from. So Texas A&M, University of Minnesota, University of Florida, and Michigan State all put this resource together. It's pretty much brand new. It just came out officially, I think, a couple months ago. Oh, but I want to show you on the left side there, you can literally go through each of these diseases, and there's fantastic pictures in there. There's probably 20, 30 pictures of these diseases. So if you don't know what you're looking at, it looks daunting when you get to this website, but it's really not. There's like 6 different diseases on there. You can look at each of the diseases, what to do as far as diagnosis. And if you're really confused, there's actually a link where you can just ask a bee expert, which is usually probably Megan, Anna, and the rest of their team, and you can get some information there.